Donald Trump did not just reshape the Republican Party. He exposed a harder question. Was modern conservatism ever a coherent philosophy, or mostly a coalition waiting for a strong personality? In this episode of The Big Questions, National Review editor Ramesh Ponnuru joined me to examine which conservative principles are still alive, why the right's retreat from free markets matters, and whether our institutions are failing us or we are failing them. Ramesh, welcome to The Big Questions.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's great. And for me, I have to admit, this is a bit of nostalgia for me. I used to love the National Review growing up when I was younger. I had the privilege of meeting and having a couple of conversations with William F. Buckley. So to speak to you today is sort of like the circle of life to myself. So thank you for joining us. And let's just start out with just very simply. You graduated from Princeton, but you were I think your degree was in history, right? It wasn't in journalism or political science or anything like that, right? So, what does the perspective of studying history bring to you as you analyze the political landscape?
Hmm. Well, DC, where I've lived and worked, at least in the general DC area, for a few decades now, has a large transient political population and is constantly replenished by young people, particularly coming to work on Capitol Hill or for the executive branch. Um, and if you have any kind of historical perspective, even in a knowledge of the 1990s, in my case, um, you have a real advantage because there's just so many fruit fly cycles around here. Then also, I would say, conservatism in particular has a disposition that is inclined to respect and seek to learn from history. Because the idea is, to build on what has worked, which requires you to know a few things about what has worked in the past.
Yeah, I guess that's something that I think, with the perspective of experience, or to put it plainly, getting older, uh, you get to see it's always, I guess, trendy to say today's youth, but I guess it applies through recent history. But it's always fascinating to me what you mentioned, that the memory of people in just about any industry now seems to go back barely a generation of humans. Barely 20-25 years seems to be the limit of what people are aware of, and it is a little troubling, but I could see what you mean by the event. When you joined the National Review in 1999, um, what did at
Five, actually.
95, I apologize. Um, what did you, at the time, when you first show up, what did you view the National Review's role as being, both either in politics generally or conservatism specifically?
Well, I thought of it as being a magazine of politics and culture that sought to guide uh, American conservatives and thereby sort of advance the conservative mission in our politics generally, which I thought of as sort of conserving the work of the founding.
And did the National Review, to you, have a certain gravitas beyond just, say, a political newspaper, or the McLaughlin Group on TV back then, or something else that would be considered conservative?
Mm.
Or was it just you say, "Oh, this is Ronald Reagan's favorite magazine," or something to that effect?
Well, it was stylish. It was serious. It was merry, and so I I just had an enormous respect and affection for it, and it was a community also. I mean, the readers were not mere consumers of it.
And it's interesting you mentioned that. I remember in my college days. Now, I will admit to being older than you are, so this my college experience probably predates yours by about 10 years. And I do remember the bunch of us that were conservatives in college in New York, which was a rare breed back then. Uh, the National Review gave us not just our political sense, but our sense of style and our sense of, we all wanted to earn enough money to go to Nicola Pione's restaurant because that's what we heard Bill Buckley's favorite restaurant was in New York on 35th Street. So we would always like aspire to that. And watching Firing Line, which I guess if you read the National Review was almost a requirement. You had to watch Firing Line on TV. Uh, and it really did represent not just the political aspect of conservatism, but also the cultural, to your point, aspect of, the intellectual side. I think no one would ever argue that National Review was the magazine equivalent of the New York Post or something. It was for serious intellectuals. Did you feel that when you got there? Um, Let me ask you a mechanical question. Did getting there match up to your expectations of what you thought of the magazine before you joined the National Review staff?
Oh, it exceeded them. I interned at the magazine the summer before my senior year of college, and I loved the people there, and I enjoyed working there, and was I was delighted when an opportunity came up to join as an employee. I wasn't 100% sure. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to be a journalist, so I deferred from law school while I tried my hand at it. But I decided I liked it enough that I never did end up going to law school.
I was going to ask you, did you see yourself initially as a writer, a policy thinker, or just someone who wanted to be part of the conservative movement at that time?
Yeah, I wasn't really sure what the role would be, but I did have a lot of interest in politics and policy.
Okay. Now, you got there, obviously, you stayed and worked there for a while, built yourself some experience and some knowledge, and you eventually became the editor of the magazine. Um, and as such, I wanted to ask you, like, today, how do you define serious conservatism? And we could get into the nuances of
Hmm.
politics in general right now. But if someone were to ask you right now, and I guess I'm asking you right now, which is, how do you define conservatism? Because for me personally, the conservatism I knew in the 80s and 90s doesn't exist anymore. But I want your perspective on that.
Well, I still think of it as an effort to preserve our political inheritance and civilizational inheritance, uh, to keep Western civilization thriving, to preserve our framework of being a free society, um, governed by uh, the U.S. Constitution.
So you view it as not necessarily conserving anything politically recently, but just the principles of the Constitution, really, limited government.
And I think that the particular policies that are optimal for any particular time are going to change. There was a tendency on the right, let's say 15 years ago, and I wrote against it at the time, to treat the program and platform of Ronald Reagan in the 1980s as though it was definitive of what conservatism should be for all time. And, I'm a great admirer of Ronald Reagan, but the example that he gave us was of a conservative responding to the particular challenges of his time in a way that accorded with conservative dispositions. And we have some of the same challenges, but some different ones. And the responses should be informed by the philosophy he brought to what he did, but can't be identical to what he did, partly because he succeeded at some of these, at meeting some of these challenges.
Right. And, perhaps for some of the younger viewers, Ronald Reagan's primary, he inherited horrible economic conditions, so he had that to worry about, and he was still it was the what thanks to him became the tail end of the Cold War as well. Him and perhaps Thatcher and the Pope. I think that was the triumvirate of freedom back then. Um, but specifically, what would you say is the biggest difference? Because there are still some conservatives um, who still reference Reagan as, "Hey, this was the height of conservatism in the United States. We need to get back to that." Even people that I think have zero connection to Ronald Reagan's approach to conservatism still try to claim that mantle. So you said, the particulars might be different, but is there anything philosophically that that you would say today's conservatives diverge from Reagan on?
Well, I'd say that people who identify today as being on the right are all over the place. And there are people who um, are generally supportive of a Reaganite philosophy who are also great supporters of Donald Trump. They think that he has done a lot to advance, lower taxes and deregulation, for example. But there are also people who are strong supporters of Donald Trump who would say um, that they're not Reaganites. Some of them just think that Reaganism is obsolete. Some of them would even say it was a mistake and have a more collectivist attitude, or an attitude that is sometimes less devoted to the U.S. Constitution. In part because a lot of we're already in a post-constitutional era. There's something sort of musty and old-fashioned and irrelevant about standing for those things. But I just think that when you talk about conservatism today, look, conservatism has always been in the U.S. Since the beginning of Bill Buckley's career. A collection of disparate groups who were united by particular political projects. And so that's still the case today, but I'd say there's in some ways more variety, um, less sense of commonality, and just more flux than there has been for most of post-war U.S. history.
Do you do you feel then that there's so let me take that back for a second. What would you say are the like American conservatism's first principles right now? Would you say, or are there any?
I think it's really up for grabs. Um, and, but so we've spoken a little bit about kind of the old conservatism, Reaganite conservatism, and as you know, one of the great ideas of that conservatism was fusionism, the idea of sort of, you could put it in different ways, but it's a combination of social and economic conservatism. And we are treating it frequently as being something from yesteryear. But if you actually look at what conservatives have done over the last 10 years, what Republicans have done over the last 10 years, a lot of it's still pretty fusionist. I mean, school choice is, I think, in some ways, kind of a perfect example of a fusionist policy, in that it's something that free market conservatives and religious conservatives can both support for different and overlapping reasons. Well, that cause has had more success in the last several years at the state level than it's ever had in its history. And if you look at the policy accomplishments of the two Trump presidencies, well, there's tax cuts, there's regulatory restraint, and there's the appointment of conservative judges to the federal bench. I mean, all of these are sort of classically Reaganite policies. And I'd say that the less Reaganite elements of President Trump's agenda have generally been less successful.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was thinking fusionism, of course, has always been part of that conservative movement, especially, starting out with Buckley, say, but and Frank Meyer, now that I think about it. But the for example, in the 80s when conservatism really enjoyed its first true wave, say post Goldwater, the the fusionists seem to have more of a libertarian bent to them, meaning the more free marketeers, the more that were really interested in limited constitutional government. And you had the blending of the social conservatives, which, I've said before in other interviews, I always was against even at the time. Certainly marriage of the religious conservatives with the political conservatives. Do you think that now that fusionism is more with populism and nationalism and conservatism, and to that extent, there might be more conflict that becomes more difficult to explain away from a conservatism that, say, most of us our age would recognize?
Hmm. Well, there's always been populist and nationalist elements to conservatism. If you think of the late 1970s conservative revival, um, it manifested in things like the opposition to the ERA and the Panama Canal Treaty. You can see some of the same elements that are present today, just like, particular issues are different. The balance of forces is a little different. So I wouldn't say this is sort of a new phenomenon. And the other interesting thing is that social conservatism has in some ways weakened as an element of the conservative coalition. The For a long time, the Republican Party had become more and more uniformly pro-life, and I'd say particularly the last 5 years that has diminished. Um, Marijuana legalization is something that is, of course, Bill Buckley was for it, but it's a bigger, more mainstream position on the right now than it used to be. Um, the right, much of it seems pretty untroubled by the spread of online gambling. So, I mean, in some ways, I'd say conservatism is as libertarian as it has ever been. The difference being that there's a lot less commitment to it. I think in the economic sphere than there used to be.
Yeah, that is a major, that was gonna be my next question, for to me, the history of conservatism has always in the US, has always been aligned with the concept of free markets. Um, but there have been people who call themselves conservative today, President Reagan, Tucker Carlson, uh, who now espouse things, not free markets, but rather fair markets. Definition, uh, shifts with the wind there. What do you think of that? Like, in terms of the abandonment of the free market, the love of free markets and the belief in free markets, to me at least, seems to be severely diminished,
Hmm.
in the current environment of conservatism right now.
Well, I would say free markets aren't an idol, and there can be practical exceptions. There can be ways the government shapes or limits markets that are reasonable. So, for example, if we turn to the issue of trade, which has, of course, been highly contested in our era, uh, most free traders, I'd say the vast majority of free traders, would admit that there are national security exceptions to free trade. And, depending on the circumstances you're in, those could be pretty large exceptions. You'd have to make practical judgments to figure out uh, just how far you should go on that. Um, but I think that the basic sense that freer trade is better for the U.S. economy, I don't see any of the work that protectionists have done as having undermined that basic insight. Um, but I think it just has to be argued out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just saw JD Vance recently on a different podcast, and he refused to commit to free trade, which I found stunning to some extent for a Republican to come out and say, I don't know if this free market thing is working out. Now, I understand what you're saying, that there's some practical applications. Ronald Reagan had his occasional tariff. Milton Friedman would always argue, hey, there are national security concerns, something that you just brought up. But I think the commitment to free trade was much more universally accepted, say 10, 20, 30 years ago, amongst
Oh, absolutely, sure. And if you think about some of the exceptions that Reagan made, for motorcycles, for
Harley
example,
Davidson was the famous example. Yeah.
yeah. But there were lots. There were voluntary export restraints. We had to convince Japan to invest. A lot of that was designed to advance a larger cause of free trade because there were protectionist elements on Capitol Hill that Reagan was, frankly, to some degree, appeasing and mollifying. And that continued. The George W. Bush tariffs on steel, for example, were an attempt to keep together a coalition that would be in favor of more free trade agreements in general. Uh, and if you had to do a temporary steel tariff in order to keep Ohio and Pennsylvania and West Virginia Republicans on board, they were willing to do that. Um, Now, the thing that really strikes me about the current vogue for protectionism and economic interventionism on the right is that its adherents will say things like, markets have limits, we should be market fundamentalists, and so on, but they don't spell out any limits on how far they would go in the other direction. And they don't really articulate any appreciation for the creative potential of markets, for what free economic actors in the right institutional settings can do. And I think that's a real blind spot, and it's a dangerous blind spot because you can't have a kind of romanticized view of government without, I think, courting some pretty serious dangers.
Do what do you think drives that? Do you think it's a belief that they just don't believe in free markets to the extent. So if I can try to uh, make my thinking clear, right? I would start out, as you said, no sacred cows. But if I started out saying, I think free markets are the most efficient way and the best way to promote growth, innovation, and generally rise up every the entirety of society, I still believe that free trade, free market capitalism has been the greatest poverty destroyer man has ever created. I could start from that and then make the exceptions for national security. You understand, work from that,
Yeah,
work back down a little bit, as opposed to, I think government is in the best position to decide what is best for growth, what is best for innovation, and try to work my way towards free market capitalism again, voluntarism, and things of that nature. Um, and that's where I see the difference, in my opinion, right now among conservatives. That in the Trump era of his definition of conservatism, there's much more of a willingness to say, let's start out with government deciding what's right, try to work back towards that ideal, as opposed to the opposite, which to me smacks very much of what back in the day we might have called blue dog Democrats or traditional Democrats, centrists who started out with the concept government is your nanny, and let's try to incorporate as much free trade as possible in there within that context.
mhm. Well, yeah, I'm sorry.
No, no, I was
Yeah.
just wondering, do you feel that I'm being accurate, or do you feel I'm overreacting as a libertarian?
I agree with what you're saying. I might sort of argue it the other way in the sense of saying it's not only or just that, free trade has in general been enriching for our society. It's also that we have a long historical experience, both in the United States and elsewhere, of protectionist policies, and they have not been particularly successful. Now, in modern protectionists, they have their own version of history, um, where and you saw this a generation ago from Pat Buchanan in several books where he argued that the U.S. flourished and became an industrial power behind a tariff wall, um, and I think that's sort of that's not completely inaccurate, right? I mean, it is certainly true that we enjoyed rising prosperity at the same time that we had high tariffs for a long time, but we also had an internal market that was getting freer all the time, and we had uh, we had a much smaller welfare state at that time than we have now. So there were other circumstances that I think go further in explaining that prosperity um, that the U.S. attained. But if you look at the specific examples of protectionism, the textile industry, the steel industry, you see a record of nearly unrelieved failure. There are attempts to come up with this or that story as having been success stories, but for every one of those, you see a dozen of well, first of all, those stories are often disputable, but there's a dozen examples of sort of obvious and needless costs without benefits that match them.
But and I guess though the point is that a lesson that's being relearned by modern day conservatives? Would you say?
Well, in some ways, I'd say the public at large is learning the lesson. I mean, the tariffs that we have now are unpopular. They're a drag on the Trump administration's um, popularity. And people have a sense, at least, that they raise prices and maybe at least a sense that they're not achieving their stated objectives. Um, whether conservatives draw that lesson, I think, is an open question.
Okay. Everywhere you look now, I would say I think we could all agree there's a lot of tribalism. There's a lot of political divisiveness right now, and to the extent that um, I think it's based on. I don't disagree with my opponent politically. I think they're evil people for holding positions different from mine. Now, that's always existed to some degree. I'm not going to be Pollyannish and say it never existed when I was in my teens or whatever. It existed. But clearly, the days of Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill sitting down over a beer to hash out some differences, those are gone, right? Um, do you feel that this is the result of fusionism, or is it that um, the first principles don't adhere as much, so that people just view political victory to be much more desirable than, say, the proliferation of those first principles?
I think that's a big question with a lot of different answers that contributed to it. I'd say, first of all, tribalism is natural. And even if you look at people who've sort of tried to transcend it, they end up reconstituting a little tribe of people who reject tribalism. Um, so you have to check it, particularly when you're thinking, and make sure that um, it's not leading your reasoning astray. As for why we got more polarized the particularly at the level of political elites, I think there's some large changes in our society and our media landscape that have contributed to that, right? The fragmentation of media um, has siloed people. But also, I think the change in the basic ground of politics. I mean, so, uh, you know, the mid 20th century, when we had these sort of large institutions and more of a sense of a common American culture, and there's, frankly, more pressure toward conformity. It was a pretty unusual period in American life that just sort of has an outsized impact on our sense of our country. Still, partly because the baby boom was such a large cohort. Um, but for much of that period, the basic ground of politics was economics. Was the New Deal and its opponents. And if you have a debate where the questions of things like, what should the minimum wage be, are basic and central questions, you can have a very different politics than if the basic and central questions are, uh, what should our abortion policy and our immigration policy be? And to the extent that we sort of move towards or back towards a more cultural based politics, uh, it's natural that we should be more divided, more deeply divided, and feel our political allegiances more viscerally. I mean, if you think about, like, sort of the what political scientists call the big sort over the last generation, with conservative states and counties and neighborhoods becoming more conservative, and the same happening on the liberal side. So you have more landslide counties and states. You have fewer contested states. On it. Part of that is people moving places that are more politically compatible. And that's the kind of thing that, if the question was, what your attitude toward unions, um, that wasn't as motivating to make that kind of change as when politics is also about, what's your attitude toward religion.
Mm, right. Do you feel that there should be, excuse me, do you feel that there should somehow be a bigger division politically between the cultural and the legal economic, say? Because one of the things that growing up, I always used to sort of mock the left, the liberals, the Democrats at is that in trying to build so big a coalition on every issue, both social and economic, um, they had too many people to please, and they were doomed to implosion, right? And it's just the natural outcome of trying to get too many disparate tribes under one tent, right? Do you feel that that's the situation now on the right, on the conservative side, that in pursuing more populist goals, that you've stitched together a coalition that, say, intellectually just shouldn't be together, right?
Well, in a nation of 350 million people, mm, where you have a political system that really strongly militates toward there being two parties, that's always going to be the case. People are going to work together for a time, and then things will fall apart. And I actually think that the ambition to build a really large and heterogeneous coalition is too weak in our politics right now. That both of our parties, um, they act as though the goal is to eke out a bare victory, and that if you win with 55% of the vote, um, influential voices in your coalition will think you gave away too much, and yeah, you should have been purer, um, to eke out the bare victory, and then use the leverage you got with that bare victory to cram down as much of your agenda as possible. I don't think this is working particularly well, honestly, for either coalition or for the country at large. And I think it would make more sense to try to build a 60-40 coalition. And the parties are not clearly competing to try to do that.
Do you feel that what you think would be a better either coalition building or something like that, would it take would it take, say, a basic restructure of our politics and our government to a more parliamentary system? Is it trying to build viable third party options, rank choice voting, or do you think it's something structural that needs to change, or is it still, in your opinion, something cultural that has to change?
I think that we should give our Madisonian Constitution another try. Um, I think that we have a Wilsonian political culture and a Madisonian Constitution, and they don't mesh together particularly well. My good friend Yuval Levin, my colleague at the American Enterprise Institute, he does a nice job in explaining, I think, a way of looking at this in his book from a couple of years ago called American Covenant. He says, yeah, look, we've got a system that is designed to facilitate bargaining among many different factions, and that requires broad consensus in order to work serious political change. And we're not making a lot of those bargains right now. We're not even really particularly trying hard. And there are two ways to go about solving that. One is to try to make bargaining um, less necessary. And so create more power for transient majorities to um, work their will. And so there's lots of things that we could do. Moving towards a more parliamentary system would be one of them. Um, Getting rid of the filibuster is one that people often talk about. Um, but the alternative is to make bargaining more possible and to try to think of structural, institutional, and cultural changes that would facilitate that. Now, we have political institutions that are not required by the Constitution, that have sort of grown up. Like the party primary system isn't spelled out in the Constitution, and there's lots of different things that we might want to try to do that. I kind of like the idea, for example, although I'd want to do this on a sort of experimental local basis and see how it goes. But I kind of like the idea of telling the political parties, look, you can decide your nomination process any way you want to, um, without government regulation or funding. If you want to hold a vote among your members, that's fine. It's not our business as the government or the taxpayers. Um, I part ways with a lot of conservatives in thinking that there is some potential for ranked choice voting or variants of ranked choice voting. Unfortunately, it's been implemented in jurisdictions that are not ideal in a lot of ways. Um, and I don't know that that has to be done in a way that weakens the parties. Because the parties can still have their candidates in ranked choice voting settings. And maybe again, you deregulate and in some ways empower the parties more to do their work. Um, but I guess I don't think of in the way a lot of progressives do. I don't think of the Constitution as the great obstacle that needs to be overcome. I I honestly think, at the risk of idolatry here, I think it's less that um, the Constitution is failing us than that we're failing the
I
Constitution.
would agree with that statement. Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that that's the case. Um, just very quickly on the whole party conversation that you just had uh, there, because it interests me. Um, what about ballot access laws and ballot access procedures? For example, in my home state, not only is it difficult to form third parties, it's hard to even write in a vote, right? So if I want to vote for Larry Sharp in New York, it's nearly impossible. The libertarians are essentially banned every time they get access thrown off. It's said that it's easier probably to get a libertarian party started in Putin's Russia than it is in New York State. Um, Do you feel that that's something that needs to change? Like to your point, I would agree with you that political parties probably shouldn't be funded at all uh, by the government. But to the extent that hey, there has to be a ballot in our democracy, what would be an approach to making that as inclusive as possible? Say,
I'm in favor of pretty small L liberal ballot access laws. Um, I just, I think of it a little bit the way I think about gerrymandering, in that I was actually just speaking at a conference the other day where a number of the people were carrying on about gerrymandering. And
I'm sorry, the
I think
positive or the negative? Oh, okay,
negative,
I would
yeah,
just like to make sure. Yeah,
negative. But and I think that it's as a source of that people exaggerate the extent to which our political problems are a result of gerrymandering. Because we've sorted into neighborhoods and counties and states in a way that we'd have the same, much the same degree of political division, and overall the effects on the party balance of power in the country as a whole are pretty small. Um, Ballot access laws, I'm not in favor of the two parties using the government to prop up the duopoly, but they also don't really need to. And I think we really saw this in the 2016 election, where you had two extremely flawed and unpopular candidates. And even so, the third party vote, well, higher than it usually is, was pretty small because there's just such a strong um, gravitational force toward the two parties. Um, that's imposed by voters, not by government, because voters just they don't want to quote waste their vote. And I think in some ways that kind of thinking is mistaken and misguided, but it's very
yeah.
powerful.
I don't know if it's gravitation so much as inertia, but I think you're probably correct. Um, and I think it also has to do as a long-suffering libertarian party member. It's also just the frustration that why bother? Why are you rigging a game that doesn't need to be rigged? It just fosters more distrust in that sense. But yeah, that's interesting. All right, let me just ask you one thing. National Review, is there a difference in your opinion, just to come full circle on this, between a magazine as an institution, and I'm talking about a magazine like paper, tactile, as opposed to National Review Online or any comparable sort of thing? Do you feel there's still a need and a place for that physical magazine? I mean, look, that used to be the thing for me, right? National Review subscriber. I couldn't wait to get my magazine in the mail back then. Granted, I'm sounding like an old fool who's reminiscing for long gone time, but do you feel there's a certain something, or is it just the actual what's contained within the ideas within the magazine?
Well, I have some biases here as the editor of our print edition. Um, I think that there is a role, even in a digital, to some degree, post literate world, in print. Some of that is maybe age and taste. And the fact is, if there's a lot of articles online that, particularly if they reach a certain length, I will actually print out and read that way, and I prefer doing it that way. But I also think, look, I mean, if you think about National Review, the print magazine versus National Review online, um, there's obviously enormous overlap between what we do, but the website can do a lot more immediate, reactions to what is happening this very hour. But the print, it gives you the luxury of stepping back a little bit and sifting and being thoughtful. Of course, that happens on the website too. Um, but it's a question of emphasis and of degree. And I think we do need print, and we also need editors. One of the things that really annoys me about Twitter slash X, particularly now, is that you have all these long format posts, which are basically articles, but nobody's edited them, which is, for me as a reader, it's inefficient. I stumble over things that should have been fixed by an editor.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was going to ask you, on the one hand, we always talk about democratization of the news, of data, and generally, I think we all agree it's a good thing. But how much do you think that there is still a need for some sort of gatekeeping in the sense of that editing that you just mentioned, right? Um, just in my own experience being in the forefront of internet journalism back in the mid 90s, um, the stuff I would get, and I'd nowhere claim my editing skills to be anywhere near yours, but basic things like spelling, sentence construction, or getting yeah, just getting to the point, efficiency that you mentioned. Do you feel that culturally we're losing a lot because everyone's an author, everyone's an expert, everyone's an opinion maker, and that the digital world has allowed that for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that our culture in particular has a strong bias in favor of self-expression. And look, I'm in the business of expressing my opinions and my views, but I think we see all around us how this can be taken too far. That people, I mean, I think particularly of political actors and journalists who are more interested in expressing themselves than they are in doing their jobs as traditionally conceived. And I think a lot of forces, technological and social, have kind of liberated that. I don't know that I, I wouldn't say we need to go back to a model of gatekeepers who are kind of in charge of what you read and what you see, whether you like it or not. But a sense of kind of choosing our own gatekeepers, I think, makes a lot of sense. That there are people and there are institutions that we decide to trust based on our experience with them, um, and and we go to them, and they can lose that trust also if they don't do their job well, or if they abuse the cultural power that they've gotten. But I don't think that sort of an unmediated free for all, just sort of just a comment section. Comment section, I guess, can be fun, particularly depending on
Right.
your personality. But it can't be everything.
Yeah, and excuse me, not to make it completely hacky, but it's the free market can decide, who gets trusted and who doesn't, so, um, that works out nicely. What would you say a healthy, rather, conservative media ecosystem would look like, say, 10 years from now?
What would a healthy media ecosystem period look like, whether sort of conservative, liberal, or different? I think a lot of we're having a lot of problems because the media industry in general, and not just conservatism, has not yet found a viable economic model for high quality journalism that works in modern circumstances. And so I think we're all trying different things. Um, but what I would say for sort of conservative media consumers is what I'd say for almost for anybody, for liberal media consumers as well, is um, one, don't trust institutions that only tell you what you already want to hear. Um, that refuse to make sort of admissions against interest to sort of acknowledge the complexity of the world. Um, and two, expose yourself to different points of view, if only to get a sense of whether the media outlets that you favor are telling you the full story. Are they giving you an accurate picture, for example, of what other people believe? And I think people, I think, frankly, I still think it is the case. I think it's been the case for a long time, and I still think it's true that conservatives generally have a better sense of what liberals think than vice versa. Um, because it's still, even in our fraction media landscape, um, easier for liberals to avoid exposure to conservative points of view at any kind of length than it is for conservatives to avoid
Do
liberal
you feel
points of view.
that, excuse me, do you feel that that's the result of the legacy media still being out there? I mean, look, going as far back as I can remember, certainly since the free speech movement at Berkeley, major media, major institutions have always tended to drift leftward towards more progressive ideas. Um, do you feel that it's the remnants of those institutions?
Well, and
Oh,
the
well, universities, they're
universities
part of it.
and, and Hollywood, and it's just you know, I don't know if it was original with her, but my late great friend Kate O'Byrne always said, conservatives have to be bilingual in a way
Yeah,
that
that's a great
liberals
way of
don't.
putting it. I never really thought of it in those terms, but okay. Well, Ramesh, thank you. I've enjoyed our conversation. Really interesting stuff. We
Right. Thank you. I did too. I
No,
hope I
no,
didn't
no,
ramble
not
too
at all,
much.
not at all. If you knew me, rambling is part of my DNA. But you didn't ramble. But I do want to quickly end on something I call the final five. Five questions, rapid fire, no right or wrong answers, just a little bit to help us understand you a little bit more. So, question number one: what is something people who only read your work will completely misunderstand about your personality?
Oh my goodness. Um, I'm having a real hard time with that. I will just say this. I was uh, years ago. I was at um, cocktail party or something, and somebody who had only read me met me and said, "Oh, I just assumed you were 60." And at the time, I was like 28. So I'll leave it to you to listeners to
So,
decide
as
what
my
that
wife would
says.
say, someone would take you from your writings to be an old soul, so to speak. Okay,
Yeah, that's the
okay,
nicest
fair
way of
enough.
putting it, probably.
You graduated from an Ivy League school, Princeton, at 20. What ordinary
Mm.
task would still completely flummox you today?
Oh my goodness. I am not maybe the first person you would turn to if you needed to change a tire.
I have the same issue, and being an auto mechanic's son, that's even more embarrassing for me. So I understand. Okay,
Mm.
number three: what would bother you more, being proven wrong by evidence, or being proven right, but for intellectually embarrassing reasons?
Huh. Um, the the aspirational answer is the latter, but I suspect the actual answer is the former.
What belief do you hold today that your 25-year-old self, say, would consider a betrayal?
Oh, well, that's really interesting. Um, hmm. I mean, that I hold today that uh, I don't know if I can condense it to an opinion, but I had much more of a passion to sort of overturn things and start over than I do now. I have more appreciation of the things that
Of
work in our
of
society.
institutions? Your younger self
Yeah,
would be again.
would be more attracted to the kind of
Right.
burn it all down
Okay, fair enough.
mentality, yeah.
Last
Whether it's to do with party establishment or
right.
Congress or
I get you.
whatever. Yeah.
That's I think many people would probably share that if they were asked this question. Okay, last one. If you could permanently retire one phrase from American political commentary, what would that be?
Oh wow, that's So you know what? I think, particularly in the last 10 years, there's a one word that has been terribly abused, and it's they. They want you to do this. Well, specify who you're talking about.
So no generalized, overgeneralized use of pronouns. You want who is doing this?
Yeah, right. We're focusing on the
Okay.
wrong pronouns.
Ramesh Ponnuru, thank you so much, senior editor at National Review Magazine. Please tell folks where can they find your work, where can they follow you.
Just one quick fix. Editor of National Review. No, 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 no problem. I just figure you can go back there. Well, you can read me at National Review. Never better time to subscribe. And the Washington Post, where I have a weekly column. And for my sins, I spend too much time at x.com, where I'm at Ramesh Ponnuru.
At Ramesh Ponnuru, it's all there on the screen. Everyone, please follow and subscribe to National Review Magazine. You'll be better for it, I assure you.